Good morning, Alfredo. My name is Alex Radford. I'm an English solicitor and Spanish lawyer with my lawyer in Spain.
Today I wanted to ask you a question which relates to the Valor de Referencia Catastral, which came into force on the 1st of January this year. Maybe first you could just tell me a little bit about what that is.
If we just go back even before that, so last year and years before, if you bought a Spanish property, we would always check the catastral value, the taxable value of a property. Okay. And let's just say you're buying for 200,000 and the catastral value was 100,000 euros, you wouldn't have anything to worry about. But if it was the other way around, then there was always a risk that the regional tax authority could inspect that purchase and transaction, because they say, you've bought for 100,000 euros, but actually the taxable value is 200,000 euros. Something is going on here which doesn't kind of quite add up. And they could issue a complementary tax bill. Okay. And that process, I'd say maybe 1 in 10 properties had that issue. And up until last year, you had various options. You could wait for the tax authorities to contact you, and then you could appeal against that, or you could pay the extra tax. And depending on how much it was, Alfredo, our advice to clients was to maybe wait and receive the actual claim from the tax authorities. And what the Spanish authorities have done now is they've kind of made that process what I think their opinion was to make it easier, but has actually made it more difficult, because they introduced this law on the 1st of January. And now you've got the market price, and every deed that is signed, they're putting this catastral reference in there. And some properties don't even have that. So they'll have a catastral reference, but they won't have the value for a catastral reference. So we've acted for clients recently, purchased a property, catastral reference, but no taxable value, which is a bit strange. So in effect, you just buy there at the market rate, and that should be sufficient. But what we are finding is that some properties are coming out with a higher taxable rate than the purchase price. And that's when it causes an issue now.
So we're talking about the transfer taxes applicable.
Yeah. So basically, transfer tax, depending on where you buy in Spain. So the Canaries, you buy a secondhand property, you pay 6.5%. Andalusia at 7%, Murcia 8%, Costa, Blanca, Valencian region 10%, Catalonia 10% too. So what's important now, and as I said, we've been doing this for quite some years, is we'll check the taxable value and the market rate and see if the taxable value is higher. And if you've got a problem with that now, so if the taxable rate is higher from the 1st of January 2022, the law states that you have to pay the tax on the higher amount. So whereas last year we would wait for the property to be the property values to be reviewed and considered, and maybe a complementary tax bill issued, now the law wants you to declare at the higher rate, which is really quite unfair, because we've got clients selling property, say, for 350,000 euros, and the taxable rate is 450. So a buyer is going to come in and all of a sudden have a massive tax bill.
Would I be right to say that this is probably going to be even more noticeable once the market cools down a little bit and the prices maybe drop a little bit, or they're not as high as they are now, that there's going to be a bigger disparity between the two?
It depends on the region you're in. I mean, some regions have got a long way to go on property prices going up. Other regions maybe hit the ceiling. But generally, I'd say, obviously this law is here to stay, but I do think that there's got to be a change, because it's the Spanish tax office is saying your property is worth X, and they're not allowing you to appeal against that value. So our advice, Alfredo, to clients who are buying a property with the higher catastral reference value, if there was a significant amount, tens of thousands of euros, I'd say wait until they come in and consider the property and the values, and then appeal then. But actually, the risk is that you could get fined, and you still got to pay the same tax.
Right, gotcha.
So it's risky, and there's no guarantee. But for example, our client there who's selling, say he manages to sell for 350, the buyer coming in will see the catastral reference value is 450. That property is based in the Costa Blanca. Transfer tax there is 10%. That's an extra 10,000 euros. Right. Is it worth that risk? And that's the kind of conversations we're having with clients. If it's a few €100, pay it and be done with it.
So the big message is make sure you check it first, correct?
Check it first. And actually, as I said, some properties have these values, some don't.
Okay, so then going to this article that I saw in Idealista the other day, the headline roughly translated was something to the effect of the new Referencia Catastral knackers home auctions or something to that effect. The idea with the home auctions is that you get them, you get it at a very good price, but you're still stuck paying this Valor de Referencia. What did you make of that? Is that the nub of it?
That is the nub of it. So basically, what I would be saying there is that the auction houses, when they're advertising those properties for auction, should be inserting the catastral value there. What we found before this law came into force is that if the catastral value was higher than the purchase price and we had an inspection, if you appealed, 9 times out of 10, the value of that appeal or the value of the property was being reduced. But as I said, now this law doesn't contemplate you appealing, which is just manifestly unfair. Any property purchase that you're considering, I'd ask the estate agent for the catastral reference value. For a second-hand property, that's easily obtained. For a brand new property, it's more difficult because typically a developer would buy a plot of land, build, and that property reference value will only end up kind of being registered on those properties 2 or 3 years down the line. So we're really only concentrating on second-hand properties here.
Right.
So yeah, do your homework. Speak to your independent lawyer about what that value is. Yeah. We work with estate agents all over the country, but we are acting for the client. So the client pays our bills and is our client. So if the catastral reference, if the catastral reference is high, of course we're gonna let them know, because basically, Alfred, if we don't, it's just the same as we're gonna let them know if there's a license of first occupation, if all the meters square match up at the land registry and the catastral registry. We're going to carry out our due diligence on the property that the client is interested in, and then it's up to the client to decide what they want to do.
Okay, so if they want some advice on the subject and they want to contract your services, what website should they visit?
Well, basically, they can contact me by email to aradford@mylawyerinspain.com, or they can visit our website and give me a call on our website, which is www.mylawyerinspain.com.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Until the next time.
Hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto. Hey, good morning, Alfredo. My name is Alex Radford. I'm an English solicitor, Spanish.
Sorry. Take 2.
Yeah, take 2. Right.